Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are doing our deep dive on Homesick Pilots, volume number 1, issues 1 through 5. And I had a first ever experience with a comic book. My family, I was just talking before we were recording, has been going through this terrible virus. My wife and I are fully recovered now, but hitting this like extreme wall of fatigue where you just completely collapse at like 3:30, 4 p.m. So I knew that was coming. I started my workday early and was basically finished with work for the day by 4, laid down, read volume or issue 1 of Homesick Pilots, fell into a deep sleep, and this never happens to me. I had an incredibly lucid dream that was themed after issue 1 of Homesick Pilot. Right. It's crazy. Like one, I think that's like how compelling the story and the art are, that like I had a vocabulary for exploring the house after one issue.
I mean, when you say like it's gonna be lucid dream and like or the visuals, because I mean,
I was trapped in the house. The fingernail marks on the walls, like all of that stuff was happening to me.
Well, because we'll talk about Casper Wijngaard's art, but I mean, he has a very specific color palette that he always tends to use, which is very vibrant. It isn't like reds and blues. It's really like he uses like cyan and magenta. You know, like it's not right. It's not neon, but it's kind of fluorescent. So was your dream kind of in that color as well? Did it have the color palette?
That's a good question. I don't remember. Remember that? So here's the thing: when I have lucid dreams, which is rare, they are usually gone within an hour. But this one was like so disturbing because I had to get up and like I started reading issue 2 when I woke up, and I was like, I'm not sure exactly where issue 1 left off and my dream began. So I had to reread issue 1. But all of that to say, clearly I was totally drawn in from the first issue.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I think it is a strong start. Because there is, this is weird. I think I mentioned this last week about the timing of this book and how issue 1 came out in December 2020. So it comes out at the tail end, or, you know, at least the tail end of that initial wave of COVID and being locked down. And even in December, you know, we're still waiting on vaccines. The people were still locked down, but there was a little more, there had been some adjustment to it, right? There'd been some adjustment to it, and people were figuring out ways to be out and be safely move around. But I think about like the initial premise of this book, like the real, real kind of reductive idea is a house you can't leave. You know, house that doesn't want you to leave, a house that keeps you trapped. And you know, knowing the life cycle of books and how long it can take for an idea to gestate and formulate, then be pitched, then actually be produced. But I can't help but think, like, if I read this in December of 2020, because I didn't read it then, I read this for the first time much later. If I had read it then and been like, oh, this is about going into a house and you can't leave, boy, that sure feels on the nose in 2020, you know?
Yeah. Although I think my wife and I, it's terrible. My wife and I were still referring to it as a golden bubble of happiness because we're introverts and we were very much enjoying. But yes. And I'm not saying I have no problem being home inside and all that. I for the most part had no problem with that, but just the thought that was a theme of this book, and even now, kind of reading it in with that, you know, someone in the rearview mirror, there's still something compelling about that idea. I think because that, whether that's an intentional metaphor or not, like it evokes that feeling. You are trapped in the house, whether it's for whatever reason. Here, it's a supernatural reason of kind of ghosts and mysticism and magic of some sort, some supernatural element of the house keeping you locked in. But still, the idea of going into a house and not leaving, like that, just that idea, that concept, just hits differently now than it would have before. And I said, I wonder what the creative timeline was for this book in terms of when it was pitched, when it came out, you know,
because I would imagine for a book to come out anytime in 2020, like this is an idea that had been pitched and brewing before that. So it wasn't like they were reactionary to it. And obviously the book isn't quote unquote about
even if they,
that. You know,
well, even if they were being reactionary to that,
yeah.
But I wouldn't have a problem with that. Like, like it's you jumping in, saying something about what's happening in the world. Like that's a perfectly valid thing to write about.
1000% agree. Yeah, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on that. It's just it is a curious thing. It's one of those kind of just like metatextual timing things that if this is a book they had pitched and we're talking about prior to, and then everything shuts down and everyone's locked in their home and they're looking at their book and being like, well, our book starts with a house that traps you inside. That's gonna feel a little weird. So yeah,
Yeah, they had to change one of the characters' names away from being Fauci. That was going to be
that was tough. Yeah. So. Yeah. It's weird. There was a character who his name was COVID. It was so weird. That was
he was crazy. 19 years old. He was a little older than the rest of them.
It was really weird, really weird. But yeah, no, I think for that metatextual reason, reading it. I read this for the first time only a handful of years ago, and rereading it now again for our discussion here. That idea just draws me in now because I can't help but think back and be like, wow, that there for a lot of people, there's something scary about that. You know, like you say, you said, you and your wife, it was that, it wasn't all that bad, and personally, I didn't find it all that terrible. It didn't change too much about my life. But
before we had kids, and and like December 2020, I can tell you definitively, we were binging The Wire, which is not a bad way to spend a month indoors.
Yeah, exactly. But when you look at the overall from the 30,000 foot view, like that was damaging for a lot of people, and I would imagine for a lot of young people too. And maybe
I can't imagine a high schooler. Yeah,
and that's exactly what I was going to say. The fact that these kids are in high school now, and the premise also being that our main characters, they're all from broken homes. They're fostered. They're in the system per se. But I thought about that as well. This idea of I'm a person now with a job. Who had to adjust working remotely, but make that work because it's my job. But if you were a high school kid during that time, like that's really got to mess you up. And yeah, I mean, we have seen already studies about this, about the effect that had on a younger generation, on these kids of that being kind of thrust upon them and what that would be like. And so reading this and trying to put yourself in the mindset of teenagers, and forget about teenagers in the early 90s, in the mid 90s. This book is like, you don't need to transport yourself back in time to the specific era this book is set in, just in the mindset of like, yeah, if you were 15, 16, 17 years old and all of a sudden like you're locked in your home now, like that's way different. That hits totally differently.
Well, what's interesting to me, I mean, many things, but I did not recheck the publication date when I was reading it. Mm-hmm. What I assumed was, they're using like a rolling 30-year thing. This must have been written in 2024, which is why they're going back to 1994, like a Back to the Future type 30-year look back, something like that. Nice
round number kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes. So I was not reading the COVID into it all, but it was so like the character is so introspective. And I think I want to talk a little bit about like the point of view narration, because it's clearly Ami's voiceover. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like it's Ami voicing over from a state in the future.
Yes.
Which 9 times out of 10, I would have said, well, obviously we know she survives the story, but spoiler alert, there's the book Kill or Be Killed.
Yeah.
Which is narrated in that fashion, but kind of from the afterlife.
Yeah.
Which you can't rule out now in a ghost story.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And I think obviously it's clear because we have some of those pages where it's just kind of a black page with like white speckles and it's just white text right there.
Well,
and
I love those pages.
they're great, and all those are written in the past tense. Like I put up one here was, I was, in all honesty, quite afraid of the big bad house. It was rotting and creaking and all, so you're right, and it is speaking from Ami's perspective. But you're right, because of the supernatural nature here. Is this her speaking from the future? Is it her speaking from a like omnipresent perspective because she's ascended out of reality, because she's now tied in with whatever ghost supernatural things happen with the house? We don't know, but I agree that that's specific enough language, and they call enough attention to it, because I think there are times, even when she's narrating, when she will switch from I was, like that kind of thing,
right,
where you catch yourself, you're telling the story, but you remind yourself, all right, I'm telling the story about the past. So you're using past tense, you're changing your tense and the words, the phrases you're using. But yeah, that's clearly an intentional choice of they want to put that in the reader's mind of, this is Ami speaking, but she's speaking looking back. She's reflecting upon her decisions and the actions that she took. So yeah, where is she speaking from? And I guess you can ponder the question of, does it really matter? Does it? No,
it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter. Yeah.
It's not like her analysis. So I think this is where it matters: is that her analysis is like so pointed that I found myself wondering if there's anything supernatural happening at all, or if that is all like a Tyler Durden metaphor for like her PTSD and her stuff with her parents and being orphaned, fostered, blah 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 blah, and like like they're in different types of foster care. Like some of them live in an orphanage, some of them live in like foster group home type things, and they're always breaking away from the home. And here they end up, she ends up in a home that you can't escape from. And she starts to have empathy for, all of the ghost souls that,
all the lost, literal lost souls,
literal lost souls who, one, have unfinished business, but two, are lonely and just want her company. Will keep inventing tasks for her. Will start to exercise toxic boundaries to keep her around. Yeah. So it had me thinking like, oh, is this going the direction of like a Fight Club thing where this is all really happening in her head and this is a metaphor?
Sure. Yeah. Is she manifesting this, or is she actually speaking from a place of hindsight? Right.
Right. So I think had this been a 5-issue run, and they didn't have the teaser on like the last page or two, I would have interpreted it all as allegorical of like,
that's fair.
She went and she really did go explore, a house that she thought was haunted, but all of her revelations and, little journeys to retrieve the horseshoe and, fight a VCR tape monster, but like just the 90s nostalgia is like, this stuff hits me in the way that things like Stranger Things are meant to. I was born in 85. Yeah. So I don't actually have nostalgia for the 80s. I have it for the 90s. Like nothing warmed this middle-aged old man's heart more than the repeated use of poser as like the worst thing you could call someone.
There is that does bring you back the idea of quote unquote authenticity.
The worst thing you could say to someone is that they're a poser.
Yeah.
And like there's
fake,
just man. And there was no defense. It was just like daggers to the heart. And so obviously it got thrown around 400 times a day.
Yeah.
Through all of middle school and high school.
It lost meaning at some point. But yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. This idea of, if they call you a poser, you can't come back and claim you're authentic, because claiming you're authentic, because if you're actually the real deal, you don't got to claim it. You are it. So if you have to defend yourself, that act in and of itself is a poser act. But what can you do? You just got called a so yeah.
Right.
Only calling someone
only a poser would be concerned about their image.
Yeah. So by lobbing that accusation,
themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the ultimate trap.
You create a catch-22 for the person. Yeah. But no, we'll talk about the 90s stuff there is really great. And I don't, we'll come back to that. I kind of want to wrap up the idea of Ami as a character and her perspective here. I do like that idea. That I was going to say the way you personify the house, but that's textual. That isn't metatextual. That is the house, like you say. The right. idea of finding tasks, things that you presume the house, like it starts off. It makes a lot of sense, right? When she goes and retrieves a horseshoe, it's like you took this thing from the house. It shouldn't have done that. The house should be, so this idea of retrieving things because the house is incomplete. So you got to bring it back together. That seems like a very true and noble kind of task for her. And then you see further on, it's like, well, now she's just continually sent on these tasks because the house wants to keep her around. And then when you find out that she was being intentionally sent out when her friends were come to look for her, so she wouldn't be there. You're right. That idea of sort of the toxic level of attachment and quote unquote friendship there. Right. And so seeing that manifest in a house, which we now know is a little more than a house, that it is just another ghost. Right. It's another ghost inhabiting an object like the horseshoe or the lamp or the action figure or whatnot. This is a ghost that's inhabiting the house. We can attribute all these things to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just an absolute blast. So I also want to talk about the art because it's so could anyone else have done this book? Is like the question.
I mean, not in this way.
If you told me there were 3 artists on this book, I would believe you. Because there are such distinct styles. Like sometimes things are kind of like broad, vaguely sketched portraits of things. Other times, like the character work and facial expressions is really specific and intense.
Yeah.
And like the coloring does so much heavy lifting here. And then you get like the diorama shot of like the house.
That's my favorite page.
I was reading that while I was really sleepy. Did you read that zigzagging left to right and then dropping down right to left for the middle row of the house and then left to right for the bottom row?
I read it. I read at the top first. So you read,
obviously top
read
left to right,
and you come down around, and then once you get in the middle, immediately realize what the conceit of the page is, and then I jumped down to the bottom right corner and read right to left back up.
Oh yes, okay.
But I think it's structured in a way where it can be read either way, whether could be because the conversations mirror each other. The two groups are having,
and you're watching, and like that's the thing is, you like bottom right corner you see breaking in the kitchen, top left you see them breaking in the second floor and being like, wait, there's a kitchen window. Wait, there's a first floor entrance.
It's much easier. Yeah. But the fact that the conversations are mirrored, obviously, that they're saying the exact same things before they meet in the middle there. But yeah, a page like that is so rad. I love when you can play with the form like that. And of course, doing that in the way where each room is also a panel.
Yes.
So, because there are ways you can do that panelist too, and it would work just as effectively. That would be more of like the DeLuca effect, which I think we've talked about before, which is one big image and a character moving through space and time. So you see multiple images of a character as they move across the page. But the background doesn't change. It's just one giant image, and it's panelless. Here they use it with the panels, the idea of them moving from room to room to room. So the effect is there and it works. But they could easily have done that without panels. So the choice to do it that way, I think it sticks with the style of the book and the fact that they're in a house moving from room to room, this idea that they're changing environments as they go. Each space, each room, each panel is somewhere different, a different part of the house. And again, stuff like this, you can only do that in comics. It only works. This visual gag only works on a static image, right? Where you have to show you have to give the impression of movement because it's a static image. But as you're looking at this page, your mind just fills in the gaps as the kids are walking room to room, upstairs, downstairs, that your mind does that trick for you, where you understand that they're moving and it's not weird that it's a static image because of the way the form works and stuff like that. I love when creators and especially artists get to do something like that and get to show what is unique about reading sequential art storytelling, because like think about how you would do this. And I hate to always compare comics to, movies or TV, but like you can't do this scene.
No, it would be a lot of cross-cutting, like a Chris Nolan would he would love the time element of like them meeting in the middle, but
you could absolutely do it with either
doing all the heavy
cross-cutting
lifting
or
for
split
the viewer.
screens,
Yes.
all that. You could absolutely do it, but it's a different effect. You get a different feeling out of that. Not saying it can't be done. You can't replicate this feeling of simultaneous motion and reading one set of dialogue and then reading the other and realizing they're the same. Like you don't get that effect because it would be happening at the same time. And so you would get it in real time that, like if you did split screen and you have characters saying the same dialogue, you've seen that movies before all the time in TV shows, and that's how you would do this scene, and it works for that medium. But to get to read one conversation and then read the other and understand intrinsically that they're happening at the same time, like that kind of trick only happens on the page, and that stuff's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely love it.
Yeah.
This is, to me, that page vaults this up into like visually a top 5 thing that we've covered. And I would say like one of the like lesser books we've covered that just like didn't come together the way it was meant to, even though I kind of love it in its own way, was The Seeds. But David Aja's work on that is a top 5 book for me that we have discussed on this podcast.
I think strictly from a layout standpoint, an art layout standpoint, I would agree. And there thing that I love so much, and it's something I've come to love about Casper Wijngaard's art. You already mentioned it. We both mentioned it. It is his use of color and when he uses it. And I've already talked about when he mentioned the color palette that he uses. It's not like your regular primary colors. Everything's just, like I said, it feels like he's not using red and blue. Like it's magenta and cyan. It's a little heightened. It's a little fluorescent. It's not neon, or you know what I'm saying? Like it's a little brighter. It's just it feels unnatural. Like you don't see these colors as like solid colors typically, in kind of out in the world. And so it gives that heightened nature. And I think about, I'm looking at the page right now when the first time we see Ami with the white hair, when she goes to the apartment
at that one a lot too. Yep.
When she goes to the apartment to get the horseshoe, and she's standing in the I guess the sliding glass door, and you see the city behind her with the palm trees, and you get that beautiful gradient of like that kind of magenta pinkish up to kind of like the darkest blue sky, which is I guess that is a color you see in certain parts of the world at that time frame. But there's something beautiful about that, because then you'll get pages where there is no background behind the character. It's a solid color, but it's not a solid yellow or a solid blue or anything like that. It's like a violet. It's that magenta. It's that cyan. It's a yellow kind of thing. There is just a color palette that he brings to all of his work. Again, the thing that Casper's working on right now that I think most people have read is the power fantasy, and that has it is just, it's undeniably his art. And obviously there are the ways he draws characters. I think specifically the way he draws faces. In particular, I think the way he draws male faces, like both the guys in Ami's band. What is it? Buzz and the
druggie,
and oh God, what's his name? Oh crap. Anyway, both of them Like they're in the power fantasy, like exactly like the same, like,
Oh,
like,
really?
like just, so I
Surely
think
not to the Jeff Lemire extreme of
not so
man,
much.
boy,
And
dog.
actually even Ami is too. There's a character who, is Japanese in the power fantasy, and you just, there are character similarities there. So you can tell there's a similar way he draws people and draws faces, but it's the colors that stand out. This kind of warm to cold contrast of kind of that magenta pink on one side, and then blocked off by something, and then that colder blue cyan on the other. The way he uses that contrast, he does that in the power fantasy. He does it to great effect here. And again, it's once you know his art, and especially his color style, which I think is very signature to him, you see it and you're like, yeah, that's a Casper Wijngaard page. That's what he does. And even when you see it like on like a variant cover, I have a variant cover that he did for Star Wars Dr. Aphra. It's just a picture of Dr. Aphra that is the character, because she has a design already. She's got a pre-existing look, but the way it's colored and the way that the pinup is done, because it's just a cover, you can tell, yeah, that's Wijngaard's art, and having a signature style like that, and having it work with the story too, like it doesn't feel out of place.
Right.
Even though these are what you might call unnatural colors, it all still works. It all still works, and it all still fits with the story.
Yeah. If anyone is this is your first Casper experience, just Google Detective Comics 1070 and the cover of that one, which was one of the earlier ones he did in Detective. But that the color scheme just on the cover is like, yes, that's the color palette Casper works with. It's starts pink at the top and it gradients through purple all the way down to a blue,
yeah.
and it's just like, yeah, that's not like a particularly standout issue, but one, I'm a big Batman like detective reader, so next time I get to see him at a show, I'm gonna bring that one to get signed, because I'm like, it's the Casperiest Casper color. And it's a one that I'm a huge fan of, is a Batman reader. But anyway, the page or panel that like most jumped out to me. So like when I say like it looks like 3 different artists collaborated on this book, and it's amazing that it's one guy. The house, when it's a monster, almost looks like a like manga, like really heavy lines and inking, like manga manhwa type monster, like what's the name, Jinu Itu, like looks like a monster from one of those manga horror books, and then on the same page though you'll have like the glowing Power Ranger style version of Ami, which is like a very different look, like very different art. And then the one that like really knocks my socks off, so one, like the male character design of that guy who speaks, I think, with a British accent under the bridge, that's kind of picking on the druggy member of the band.
Oh,
like, the detail on that guy was unbelievable. I was like, is this the main character of the book? Because he's getting that level of attention. But the more important thing is, once the house is activating and it's fighting the very tiny version of the VCR monster, you get one panel where you see them running into the van from the monster's eye, and it looks like an infrared camera from a helicopter. I was zooming, so I'm reading digitally, and I was like zooming in, like they had to, like, this had to be something they photoshopped and dropped in. Like, there's no way this was drawn by the same person, but I'm pretty sure it was drawn.
Yeah, I think so. I think so, and
that's all coloring.
Maybe whatever digital effect of kind of washing and blurring. I have that exact page, because that's the page where the top half is the house that's massive.
That's the one where I was like, that's very manga coded.
Yeah, the previously much larger VCR monster is like super small because this house is massive. Yeah, there is something to that, and I think part of that too is just there's a cleanness to the way that Casper draws characters. That is, actually, you mentioned Divinaha. I think there's something very similar where there's not a lot of line work. It's very simple lines. There's very minimal shading. There's actually a lot of flat color, especially in the background. I mean, that's kind of what the style is.
I was going to say, there are occasional Lee Lowridge color jobs that will pick up on this, but they're still like Lee doesn't go to these types of neons fluorescence.
I think someone like Lee, who is a colorist, will adapt to whatever the book is, the style is.
That's true.
When I think of someone like Casper, I think of someone like Michael Cho. I think of Doc Shaner. Also Chris Somney. I don't know if Somney colors himself or not. But it's not busy. It's very clean line work. You know, it's a lot of simple lines to draw faces and expressions. He's not doing a lot of there's no kind of like cross hatching, anything like that. So when you get to the house, that is just very angular and sharp, you know, and by the nature of the fact that there are wood slats that are magically being held together, it's very jagged and very edgy, which is just not how he draws characters in general. So I think because of that, it stands out even more. I think even the VCR monster, because it's it's the tape that's running around. Yeah. There's still a smoothness to that fits more in line with the way he draws characters in general. But because the house is such a different physical makeup, I think it does stand out even more, and it jumps out at you to your point of being like, wait, did someone else come in and do this? Because he doesn't draw like this normally. This is not his style. We're not seeing him do this normally. So I you know, to see him get to be able to kind of flex all those different styles and do something completely radically different than kind of what the rest of the book is. I think it's awesome. And yet it feels of a piece. I think because of the way it's colored and shaded, the fact that the colors are all the same still, right? That because we're kind of at night, right? This kind of twilight magic hour kind of thing. It's bathed in that kind of blue cyan kind of color, and the light emanating from it in various places is that like hot magenta again. So it's the same color palette. So it fits in. It doesn't change what your eyes are looking at. Because again, there's a world where we could have done that, and this could have been completely different. Where maybe the colors for the house are just shockingly different. Maybe there's like regular, straight, bright primary colors, just like straight red, blue, yellow, and it really jumps out at you. But it is still the same color palette, so it all still feels of a piece, and that makes sense given what the story is. That Ami is inside the house now, right? So it's almost like she is fully merged with it, and so she brings all of that part of the world with her into the house, so it wouldn't be radically different. But I think because of that, even though it is so visually arresting, because it's such a different style, and it's the only thing in the book that looks like that, which clearly is intentional, because that's like the house stood up and walked away, like that's a thing. It stands out in the way I think it's supposed to stand out, but it doesn't feel out of place.
Right. Yeah. By the way, you mentioned that she merges with the house.
Yeah.
Yes. No. I'm not gonna nitpick your wording there. Because we revisit that diorama view of the house, but with everything kind of branching onto her, out of her. She's kind of been engrafted into the house in a way.
Yeah.
It's interesting that she is now certain that she's in control of it.
Yes.
It is not the type of horror book where she is like trapped for arbitrary torment or torture. She does seem to have power over certain elements of the house, or control over it in some way.
There's some
an unexpected twist for me. I didn't. It's a little genre breaking.
Actually, before we move past this, do you consider this a horror book?
I think you on some extent you have to. Okay.
I mean, I guess there are horror
elements for sure. Yes,
like when the house attacks the other band, and like door opens, big river of blood flows out. I guess there's some horror parts there.
Well, the whole
the
premise of within the first few pages of the book, they're like, there's this house up on the hill.
It kills
It's
people.
haunted.
Yeah.
It kills people. It's got this lore around it. And so, it's supernatural with horror elements, which I think would probably lazily, like at a Barnes and Noble, they would probably call it horror. I think a comic shop would say it's got horror elements, but
I'm flipping through it again here, and like I'm just flip past the lady who had the horseshoe, who was like, this thing brought me all the luck, but it's actually a curse. I hate it. I can't get rid of it.
Jumps off the building. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, you know what? That's pretty dark, actually. There maybe is more of a psychological horror going on. I guess when I think of horror, you always think, I tend to automatically jump to gore and frights and things like that.
No, this is more in the vein of Lemire Sorrentino horror.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of that, like we said, but it really is more psychological. And I guess that would make sense. The horseshoe
guy reminds me of the villainous thing in Gideon Falls.
That's good comp, yeah.
And Bone Orchard mythos, which I'm dreadfully behind on the Bone Orchard mythos because it's just been one of those like slow drip series that
there hasn't been anything new for a while. So you can
anything new for a while,
yeah.
But also stuff just kept coming out, and it was like 6 issues here, 6 issues there, 6 issues. Yeah. It was like following something at Dark Horse. It just happened to be an Image.
But that I think is it now that I'm rethinking about, now that I posed the question and thought about it myself, and I'm going to answer it that way, it is very much more of the psychological horror, and that does play into the idea that the house is controlling, right? The house is manipulating Ami into thinking, and at the end there, she feels like she has control, right? Because she felt like, hey, I was doing this for you because I did feel there was a connection there. And the house was also like, yes, we're the same. You have to stay. But she's like, no, wait, no, now you're manipulating. So there is that level of manipulation there, and what kind of horror that can bring. I definitely think that tracks a lot more now.
By the way, the drummer's name is Rip, which Rip. I kept
Rip and Buzz.
I kept not reading as a name because, like all comics, all of the narration and captions are all caps. Yes. So I was reading it as R.I.P., like rest in peace, especially with all of the horror stuff. So I'm like, I assume that's some foreshadowing, foretelling, something.
Maybe. Could be. I guess it probably would have helped if this book used mixed case lettering. But that's always
it's very rare in dialogue.
It's very specific when a book goes that route. Rip and Buzz. Thank you. Okay. But yeah, there is and
then there's Meg, who is the only
survivor of the,
as we know, as of now, the only survivor, who is now it's the classic hero origin story where you now have a villain who has the same powers as the hero, like an inverse version of it. But I think what's interesting about this book is that you could have told this same exact story from Meg's perspective, and you would be like, yeah, take down that house.
Yeah.
Whereas, look what it's doing. Since we're following Ami, we're like,
that's a good point. I like that.
We're like, I'm not sure the house is, evil incarnate. Which it's like, you have me defending an extremely demonic looking guy with a horseshoe for a head.
Yeah. It's tough.
Because that's where our character is. And it just shows you the power of point of view.
Perspective. Definitely. Yeah. Because we're saying we don't have to side with the house, but we're siding with Ami. So we're rooting for her to get out of this somehow and fix it or figure it out. Right. And so anyone opposed to that, regardless of what their intentions are, because Meg's got a very clear point of view, like, hey, that house killed my friends. You know?
Tried to kill me, and I'm covered in blood still.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think the thing that like softened me up is, so like you see this curse of the horseshoe thing, right? Mm-hmm. And like this huge exoskeleton comes out of it. Woman finally gets freed of it, and I love when Ami is like, oh, that was a little easier than I thought it would be. Yeah. but that's when she realizes she has this power over the house and the materials in the house. But you see this, so you just assume like, oh, that exoskeleton thing is terrible. But then it's given to Buzz to save Ami's life.
Yes.
And it's like, not only does that make you think like, oh, well, that exosuit thing is more neutral. Like that might have more to do with the person in it than the suit itself, even though it's clearly given and gifted by this smiling horseshoe demon guy.
Yeah.
But also that I think softens you to like, oh, just because something seemed scary the first time I encountered it does not necessarily mean that it's evil or that it's the thing to be overcome.
Yeah.
So then, then later in the book, when like we're pretty sure the house has killed at least 2 members of was it the Nuclear Bastards?
Nuclear Bastards, yeah.
We're like, yeah, but there could be information like, I'll hold out judgment on this house, also, which is messed up.
There's also a little bit of like, yeah, but those guys kind of sucked, right?
They did suck, yeah.
Not saying they deserve to die, but maybe don't be jerks, don't be. But yeah, that is, I think, totally right about the idea of point of view and perspective in terms of where we are, and that I don't think you want to see anything bad happen to Meg because bad stuff already happened to Meg. In
a bad book, that could not be done. Like I was just thinking about, well, you go back to like. This villain problem of like the like inverse blah 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 the MCU gets that lobbed at it a lot.
Sure.
Had you told Iron Man 1 from Obadiah Stane's perspective, it would not work. Like the point of view is just not sympathetic to be like, well, but I want more money, so I'm going to deal these arms to terrorists. I'm going to try to kill Tony Stark. When it doesn't work, I'll stab him in the back, go behind his back. So like you would not be able to follow that character sympathetically.
Sure,
whereas this one, I think you could. Like you could just as easily have followed Meg and the Nuclear Bastards and been like, homesick pilots suck. Like these guys are terrible. They're a bunch of posers.
Yeah. That I think that makes sense. To take that further, you kind of did see that with Black Panther.
Yes.
You didn't follow Killmonger, but you got enough his backstory. Yeah, you don't have to agree with like, hey, I want to take over the world, but the reason he works as a villain is because we saw enough of his perspective outside of T'Challa. We saw we saw his perspective, we saw his experience outside of our titular main character. And so there is, whether it's sympathy or empathy for him or whatnot, there's an understanding there. I think it works there. And so that definitely sets up intrigue going forward between what's this clash going to end up being, Yeah. Is it just a full knockdown drag out? Is there an attempt to try to understand each other? What does it lead to? I think it leads to a lot of real cool questions for the rest of the story. Definitely.
Absolutely. I actually don't have that many more notes on this story because like story wise they cover a good bit of ground, but it's not a ton of stuff happening. I guess the only other character we haven't talked about who seems like he will keep coming up more than expected is the cop with the mustache who gets kicked in the head. Maybe he's just a volume 1 guy, but I have not read ahead yet. But it now would not surprise me if he was a thorn in their side for volume 2, beginning of volume 3, and then either has a redemptive arc where he like does the right thing at the end or just continues to be the worst and gets in the way of everything.
What I will say is I think the thing that not only threw me the first time I read it, but it did kind of, I guess it did because I wasn't expecting it, was this other group of like magical cops that are out here, like ghost hunters.
Yeah.
Like you think it's a story about these kids in this band and this house that's haunted or whatnot. And then you find this other like group of, I don't know, techno warriors, who are dealing with the supernatural that kind of throw that kind of come in there in what the issue 4, I think, is when you first see them.
I was flipping back to the description from the solicitor and I was like, Power Rangers meets The Shining. I think it's like Ghostbusters meets The Shining.
And I think that's the Power Ranger part of it. This idea but I think the idea of this, the groups here, the power ups, the like essentially piloting mechs that are just like buildings and houses, but that's what you're doing there. But that element of it, of like this other, there's a supernatural element, but there's also this technology element to it, right? Like these guys are some level of supernatural hacking or whatnot. They have technology that are doing part of this, whatever their ghost hunting is, their ghost busting is, which that was an angle I didn't quite expect. And I do wonder if some of that is like, we're playing into the early 90s of computers and internet, I think one of the guys is like General Razor, like RZOR,
yeah,
which is like, that's like the biggest hacksaw name like you could give someone from like in the mid 90s who was like, that's out of hackers. I'm sorry. Like that's a name out of hackers. Right. So I wonder if some of that is playing into the 90s of it all. Like the fact that element is here. And it feels to me, given some of all the other kind of 90s riffs and references, that definitely feels like a riff on what people thought technology and the internet and computers would have been like, what they were like for that very short period of time from like 1993 and 1997, before we had an idea of what it actually became. It seems like they're having a little bit of fun at that, which I appreciate. It's another one of those levels of the 90s nostalgia that I see. And again, whether it's intentional or not, because of the era they set this in, my mind can't help but go to that and think, well, this is a riff on things like hackers and the net and stuff like that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I even think of like the technological promise of the movie like Twister. And like, I never saw the like sequel Twisters a couple years ago, but what all I thought was like, how could they possibly... That's actually what I heard. But I like conceptually, without having seen it or even the trailer or anything, I was just like, but it's like 2020s now. Like you wouldn't need to drive a pickup truck into a field and try to get hit by like you could just fly a drone into it and just have it release all of your Pepsi product placement.
Yeah.
So I was like, maybe it's set in the late 90s.
Well,
like
what I will say is, the use of advanced technology is part of Twisters. That is great. That is a central plot point in that movie. It's not that bad. I think it got a bad rap. Glenn Powell is very fun in it.
I low-key love Glenn Powell. Like he just keeps climbing in my book, even though he's not like crushing it on anything. I really enjoyed his Running Man.
Yeah.
And
so yeah, it's a fine movie. You can check it out. But yeah, I think we touched on it earlier. And before we wrap, I do want to talk about like really just some of the 90s of it. And I think that this is one of those things where I think we talked about this way back at the beginning when we did Paper Girls, and that idea of anytime creators are setting a story in a time frame when they were definitely children. Not saying it's autobiographical, but they're like, I was a kid at this point. There is that temptation, I'm sure, just to put everything in there, make everything a reference. Every panel's got 95 things. That's kind of the Stranger Things problem that I think the Duffer Brothers had, where it's like every moment of every scene is going to be 17 references. And that just wasn't the case, that isn't what the 80s were actually like. The stuff was present, but it wasn't like every shot, every time someone said something, it was 14 catchphrases and product play, like it wasn't all there. And I think this book does a good job of that, where they're not making specific references to things, like they're not like, no one's talking about Nirvana or Pearl Jam here, specifically. No one's talking about that. But I think the way people are styled, and I think specifically the way that Ami is dressed, when she goes into the video store and she has on like the knee-high socks and like the baby doll dress, it's like, oh right, like Lisa Loeb wore that in the Stay video. Like that's what people wore back then. That's what someone her age would have worn. Like I know that girl. I know who she is, you know? And obviously the way the guys are dressed, the flannel around the waist thing, like there was just these visual signifiers of that are specific, but they're not calling them out. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You know, they're there to be seen, but they're not like pointing big arrows like, look, it was the 90s.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously going into a video rental store and facing a VCR demon is a little bit. However, if you look at that page, what you won't see is a bunch of posters for early 90s movies and the titles of films on the shelf. Yes. Like those are the type of Easter eggs that some people just can't resist. Mm-hmm. And to me, I in this book, that wouldn't have taken away anything.
It wouldn't have.
It's not additive to the value of like, is this worth my time or not? Okay, I've just pulled it up, dead end video. Like they could have easily just called that Blockbuster or something like that for the nostalgia, but they were just like, no, because there were also these mom and pop video rental shops.
Yes.
Which I think people forget about. There was, Blockbuster and Hollywood Video had one in every part of town, but there was also your local mom and pop shop equivalent. And I see one in that whole exchange. I see one poster on the wall where you might be able to guess the movie. But like the poster, you can probably see 30% of it.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? There is an Aliens 3 poster.
What?
I'm just scroll past it. Yeah.
I think there's a Jurassic Park one.
There might be one. There's
again,
a little there. Okay.
You can recognize the logo.
I missed it the first time. I missed it
the first time but again, other ones you wouldn't be able to miss it because they'd be so in your face about it.
That's a good point.
I think that's the point you're making.
That's a good point.
What they would want is for someone to like be making a wiki, like a fan wiki of this and being like, here's all the things that we caught, and they're not really hard to catch because they're in your face.
You're right. The fact that I didn't catch the first time does prove my point there, because you're right. The other way to do it would be to have a character make a comment about the movie. To be like, this is set in 19, so this, so the fact that I didn't catch that before, and only now because I'm looking at posters.
I mean, here's the difference. Like when Captain Marvel has that scene in a blockbuster, like, that was gilding the lily a little bit. Yeah. And again, like I finally felt like, I'm being serviced with 90s nostalgia. Yeah. Like I was okay with it in Captain Marvel because I felt like, well, this type of nostalgia bait is a trope, but not for the 90s.
Yeah. Well,
not yet. There's
because fan service is terrible unless it's servicing me and my fandom.
Exactly.
All other fan service is useless and pointless.
But no one's allowed to feel nostalgic. Like you're not authentically nostalgic until you hit 40. Like that's when people your age are really like influencing the industry and being like,
well, because you're right. That's what happens, right?
There are like breakthrough stars who are 20 years younger than me, but they're not the ones setting the template for stuff.
They're the ones who are acting in it because that's who you hire. But yeah, when the people who make stuff are the people of your generation who grew up with the same stuff you did, you're going to look back and be like, oh, right. Which is why you get these like 20 some odd year cycles. Why in the 70s, you had movies about the 50s, 80s, right. So that you have that time frame because people who grew up with that, who have that memory, who have that nostalgia, they're now the ones making the media. And you're right. It all just cycles. And at some point it becomes a time when the stuff that came out when you were when college is like the nostalgia bait. And you're like, wait, I was an adult when that came out. That's not nostalgia. We can't be doing that yet. It feels weird enough going back to the 90s and having that moment of like, oh, right, it's the 90s. I remember this stuff. And then, immediately followed by, oh right, I remember that stuff. That's not good. That means
Right.
I've crossed that Rubicon now. But there is still there. You're right. There is a sense of when I see a book that is portraying a time that I actually remember. Because in the same vein, I'm sure we talked about this way back when we did Paper Girls. I'm born in the early 80s. So I still have memories of the late 80s, but I am younger than those characters were in the story. So I don't have the same relationship to the stuff from the 80s as those characters would have been. I'm much closer in age to, I think, what Ami, Buzz, and Rip are, and Meg and all that. These guys are probably, if we're looking at the timeline, was this set in 94, right?
Yes, 1994, which, by the way, I deeply appreciated the little fourth wall moment at the end of like October 1994. That's 3 months later if you're not keeping track. I was like, great. I was not keeping track. I remember the year. Why would I remember the month?
So if I'm doing the math about how old these kids are probably actually close to my brother's age, which is a few years older than I am. But in the same kind of life experience. So when I see books like that, I'm going to be a little more hypercritical, be like, that's not how it was. And that's not what it looked like. But again, the way the kids are dressed and how they act, how they talk to each other, that feels authentic enough to me, even though this book is set in somewhere in California. What was the town? It was like Santa Manos or whatever.
Yeah. I just assumed that was real.
Saint Hands. Like Manos is hands, right?
Oh boy! I did not think of that.
We feminized. The one I always remember, what I think about, is the movie Bring It On, where in Bring It On they were in the town of Rancho Cucamonga, which I think is like meat farm is what it comes out to. But it's set in.
Yes, it is hands.
Yeah, it's set in California in the mid '90s, and like both Dan Waters and Casper Wijngaard are British. So the idea that this wouldn't have been their experience, and yet they're translating it here. But this is the kind of book, when you're going for nostalgia, right? I think a book like this has to feel like it's of the time. It doesn't have to hit it exactly, because like getting the specifics right getting the specifics are impossible because everyone's experience is different, but it has to look and feel. And I think the way the characters are drawn, again, I think specifically the fashion and the clothes, you're like, oh, right. Again, I remember kids wearing that. I remember wearing that. I remember, walking around and seeing, got guys in chain wallets and stud jackets and vests and stuff like that, you're real punks or whatnot. All of this stuff just makes sense. Like, I think Meg has a flannel tied around her waist over a skirt and a t-shirt. You're like, why are you wearing that? It's because that's what you did, I mean,
that's actually come back now, I think, a little bit.
And that's really unfortunate.
I think it's tongue in cheek now, but yeah.
That is the cycle of that. It's the same way that there were kids I knew in the 90s, like bell bottoms came back. Like, what are we doing, folks?
They tried. They pivoted into bootcut.
They did, but they came back. And so this cycles around. But seeing people dressed like that, seeing Rip and Buzz, just like, in like Buzz has got some sort of like windbreaker on kind of thing. And I want to say it's like kind of neon colored, but that's just how Casper draws and colors stuff. But like there is just a familiarity with the way these characters look to me that just it feels right. That this is what, and even like the background kids, the random people in town at school or whatnot. Like, again, I know those people. I went to school with those people. I saw those kids around. And that level of authenticity, where again, it's not about the specifics. It's just this feels right to me, and I appreciate that on the fan service level, that they're not trying to hit it on the nose. They're not trying to be like, this is exactly what it was in this place. This is what it felt like back then. And I like that. I think that's cool.
Yeah. Really, really good book. I can't genuinely cannot predict where this book is going.
It could go anywhere right now.
It could go anywhere. And I think I'm very excited, but also nervous because I think there are several jump the shark options here. That like I've seen books start strong like this before and go for one of the more ridiculous or silly options available. So
I think we can put it
I'm
out
not
there.
ruling that out.
I would say I think the way this first arc ends, you can see the story going in a number of ways, but it could go in the more supernatural way, right? It could go into the more kind of technological way, which, you know, it seems to set up that way with Meg, you know, going into pilot whatever ghost cannon thing, right? So there are some different ways they can go, or they could try and merge those together into one thing. But yeah, there are so many options on the table there that I think they have blended so many genres. And again, looking back on that solicitation pitch of Power Rangers meets The Shining, which again makes no sense at first, but after this first volume, you're like, you know what? I can see that. I can see how someone got to that very rudimentary and reductive of kind of pairing.
But I do think it's one of those where like
it makes sense.
It makes sense after you read it, which I don't.
It makes sense in hindsight. It makes sense in hindsight.
Which doesn't help you as an elevator pitch, right? Like you need to be able to imagine it a little bit, and I think
probably so.
Other than like, well, that's messed up, which that can work. Like if it sounds weird enough, that can work.
But then you have to prove it, you know?
Yes.
To be like, here's the pitch, and that can be intriguing enough, but then you got to deliver a book that actually does kind of feel like that. And so, yeah, you have the supernatural, you have the weird mech suit techno aspect of it. And if it can blend those things and take these two very disparate storytelling types and genres and tell a coherent story, I think that's crazy successful. They can pull that off. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to going further with it. And also, I don't know, do you have trepidation at all knowing that it's just 3 arcs, it's just 15 issues, or was it the kind of thing where you're like opening act, rising action, resolution kind of thing? Like are you viewing it already like a 3-act play?
I will say I have the bias in that I'm very much in favor of like 12 to 15 issues is my perfect arc.
Yeah, you love that kind of, that's like a maxi series. If we're like, using the terminology.
You have enough space to like let characters breathe and do things, but you're not adding any fluff. Or if you are, you're really stretching your material thin. Yeah. So yes,
enough space to let things breathe and sit before they resolve, as opposed to immediately getting to the end.
Right. Yeah. So I suspect, 2 will have to end with everything coming unraveled.
If we're following kind of that traditional 3-act structure, absolutely. The end of 2 is when everything goes terrible. That is the storytelling concept that we're aware of, that we're familiar with.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm very optimistic. I think the big distinction is whether the creative team knew they were doing 15 or if they were open to an ongoing series and sales started to drop after issue 10. And they were like, okay, let's wrap it up. Then you might not have the solid second arc. And that's why I like the maxi series by design. Like they announced at issue 1, this is 1 of 12. Like those tend to be great.
That is, you tend to see more of that at the big 2, because at a creator owned, it's always hard to tell when we just talked about this, right? We just talked about this with our last book of Skyward. At the end there, they were saying it was always going to be 15 issues, and you're like, was it always going to, and then you have a book like Joyride where it was supposed to be 4, then it got to an ongoing, and then they got to the 10 and nope, we got to wrap this up to 12, So you those fluctions, that unpredictability, you never know. So I think the second arc will tell us a lot, probably, right? The way how the second arc goes will probably tell us or give some good signs of what did they think how long did they think the story was going to run? I think we'll get a good sense of that in volume 2. So, but I'm with you. In general, I think I like 20 to 24 for a series, but I'm still with you. I like the idea of creators knowing you have X amount of space to tell your story.
Yes.
And if I know that going into it, I'm more forgiving to a story to go off in different ways and things like that, because I know that they know they're coming to an end at some point. And if it's not going to be that, let it be ongoing forever and then end it after like 40 something after you've gone and exhausted yourself, like tell me it's ongoing and then end when you feel like you got the end, versus give me 15 and you have to stop it at 15 because that's the end of it now. I don't like the abrupt end. So yeah, I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to see because the possibilities of what the story can do and how it's kind of blending and meshing genres and story types. That's exciting. That is interesting enough for me.
Okay, so you have not finished. Am I not understand that correctly?
I have not finished yet.
Okay,
no.
We're in rare territory again.
Yeah, I have held off intentionally because normally I will, even if the book I haven't read before, I'll just go and read all of it. This one I'm holding off because I want to have that experience here. So no, I have not read. I had read volume 1 prior though. I read volume 1 a few years back. Hadn't read any more. Reread it for this just for discussion, but I have not read 2 and 3.
Well, I'm excited. We'll dig in, and these have titles, right? We didn't call that out.
Oh yeah, we did.
This is Teenage Haunts.
Teenage Haunts, yes.
And the next one is volume 2, which would be issues 6 through 10, and that is I Want to Be a Walking Weapon, which like after you read volume 1, there's no doubt about what that means.
Yeah, pretty clear.
So anyway, all right. Well, thank you for listening. We will see you next week. Find us on storiedarcs.com, Instagram, Blue Sky, and anywhere else that Google says we are.
Sounds good. Peace.